When was the golden age of skateboarding, when everything was at its peak? I'm going to assume that this has already happened, although I would like to believe it's in the future and that things are just going to keep getting better and better and better. But for the sake of the question, let's do it that way. And I'd like to thank Leroy Jackson for submitting this question. And I want to look at two different factors. First is media. So this is going to be skate videos, magazines, on-air competitions, video games, that type of stuff. And the second is the popularity and availability of skateboards. We have 5 decades to work with here because the 70s just aren't going to cut it. But let's look at the 80s. So the 80s had skate videos. They had the Powell Peralta ones, they had the 8th Street ones. A lot of these videos are all-time classics, but for the most part, they filmed them in a weekend. They were not all that sophisticated compared to things that would come along later. There were some video games going on, arcade games and on the NES, but they weren't very compelling, really. There was no skateboarding on TV unless it was the local news covering an event of some kind. But magazines were huge, and that was great. There were a lot of those going on. But the 90s essentially did everything better. Skate TV came out in 1990. The magazines were all in color, which was great. Skate videos got to be a lot more intense, where there were more brands putting out more of them, but also they spent more time on each one, which was great. The Tony Hawk series came out, so there were plenty of games. There was lots of competition with the Tony Hawk series. So the 90s went really, really well. The 2000s kept that trajectory for the most part. The Tony Hawk series put out some of its best games. The Skate series even came out around that time as well. Skate videos were doing great, some of the best ones ever. Round 3, Fully Flared, some of my favorites came out in this decade. Magazines were starting to taper off, but being able to share videos online started to happen, and this was amazing. There was a full-length freestyle video that came out, I think it was about 2004, and because of the internet you could connect niche groups of people and you could see more skating. And I always love to see the local team of different places put together stuff and just do some weird tricks that I haven't seen before. That was a great time to be in skateboarding. Televised contests were going strong, like the S Game of Skate. You had the Maloof Money Cup, you had the X Games, you had the Gravity Games, you had more than I can think of right now. The 2010s ramped up niche content, so watching people on Instagram or here on YouTube became more and more of a thing. Magazines began to really take a plummet. The video game scene was not great. Skate 3 came out in 2010, and then not much else went out for the rest of the decade. Competitions died out for the most part, except for Street League. And for the most part, if you were watching skateboarding, it was going to be on your phone. Now, the 2020s are still pretty new. Skater XL, Session, and a new skate game coming out. There are full-length skate videos still coming out, although they're mostly online. Some of them have very limited physical editions that come out as well. Street League is still going on. Now we have the Olympics in the mix, so it's getting easier and easier to watch skateboarding. In fact, it's easier and easier to watch extremely niche skateboarding, which is the case across the board. Just ask your ever increasingly specific OnlyFans subscription list. But let's look at popularity and availability as well, because that is a very fine line to cross. Most skaters, when I see in my comments and people talking about it and the questions that they submit, they don't want skateboarding to be that popular. You don't want everyone in school to be a skateboarder, but you also don't want nobody to be a skateboarder. In different time periods, it would be impossible to get a skateboard because there's not enough skaters in the area to support a skate shop. So there is a specific line of where you want things to be. Let's look at the 80s. The 80s were good. There was excitement in skateboarding. It was still pretty fresh. The 90s kind of went a bit too far the other way. You hear stories of people getting beat up just for having a skateboard. I started in 2001, and I remember being very embarrassed being seen holding a skateboard at that time. Of course, I had severe anxiety, and I would have been embarrassed to be caught with Britney Spears in a Bentley, but things did get better around the 2000s. Some would argue that the 10s and the 20s have gotten a bit too popular. I do see that claim coming about fairly often. In my mind, there is a clear winner, but before we get into it, I want to make a couple of points. First, your criteria might be different. You might be more interested in the big names in skateboarding at the time, maybe more interested in your local scene. You may be more interested in the online scene because if you were like me and you grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, there weren't a lot of people to skate with. So there may be other things that are more important to you. And the second thing I want to point out is that this question was submitted on my website, radradvideo.com. You could submit your own question there. You can buy shirts, and you can like and subscribe, which will really help out this channel. I'm really trying to get it back going again, and I appreciate you for that. But the last thing I want to show you is this chart. If you look at how people's music preferences change with age, you'll find that most people's favorite music came out when they were about 13 to 16, regardless of what era that is. It just hit them at the right time in their life, made a big impression, and everything outside of that window is a little bit worse. And it seems possible that when you believe skateboarding was the best is when you were about 15 years old. And for me, that was 2003. Which is coincidentally the correct answer. Sorry if you were a different age and you believe a different time was better. I do believe that the 2000s were genuinely the best. It had the best mix of new stuff where you could share things online, but there were a lot of magazines and videos and games and all that stuff still coming out. You had a mix of the old stuff and new stuff all coming together. It's a very exciting time in skateboarding. If you think it was a different time, let me know in the comments and we can argue it out in there. But that's it for now. Thanks for hanging out.